Okay, it looks like the logging in has slowed down, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Kim Brown. I'm with the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today's webinar is sponsored by the University of Montana Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects in partnership with Children's Special Health Services at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. All attendees are currently muted. That cuts down on the background noise, so it will be easier for everybody to hear our presenter. If you want to ask the presenter a question, you may type your question into the chat box, and we will read those off, and the presenter will respond as she's able to take breaks in her presentation. And today's presenter welcomes questions throughout the presentation. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units, when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar. It can take up to 2 weeks to get the OPI renewal units emailed out, so do be watching for those, and you must have pre-registered in order to receive the OPI credit. Please note that we're currently unable to issue other kinds of attendance documentation for the webinars. Today's session is being audio taped for the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects Resource Library and the Rural Institute Pluck Online Transition Toolbox, and I'll put those addresses into the chat box a little bit later in the presentation. You'll also see that in your chat box I've put the address for a PDF version of today's PowerPoint if you're interested in printing that off or printing off a couple of slides from it or reading through it after today's presentation. After the session, I will be sending you a survey link. It's a very short online evaluation of today's webinar, and we really do ask you to take the time to complete that. We value the feedback that we receive from attendees, and it helps us to improve the webinars in the future. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce and thank today's speaker. We have Ellen Condon. She is the Director of the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects. Welcome, Ellen, and thanks.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome, everybody. Today we're producing a new webinar, and we've, created this based on your requests that you give us in the feedback after each of the webinar sessions when you're asked to give us ideas for new topics of training areas. And so today we're going to be talking about work experiences in rural areas. And so what I want you to think about is, hey, Kim. Oh, there we go. I don't know if you did that or if I did that, but I'm having a hard time advancing that. But what I want you to think about is the whole purpose of why we're doing work experience and what our end goal of work experience is. And I think what we want to keep in mind is where we're headed after this student graduates. And ideally, everybody that we're working with who's receiving services through special education, we are considering paid employment in the community as a post-school outcome. So if we think about what our goal of work experience is going to be, it's not just to go on some different work experience field trips, or it's not just to add this into some class schedules, but it's really the end goal would be placement of each student in a well-matched job with adequate and individualized supports in place after graduation from high school. And what we know is that students who graduate into a paid job right out of high school, one, are much cheaper to place than students who either sit around at home for a while or go through a sheltered workshop before they go into community employment. And also students who have had real paid work experience before they exit high school are far more likely to be employed as adults. One of the tricks for folks who have some ongoing support needs or who are going to be in need of adult services in order to work is that the whole, while students are in school, they're entitled to special ed services. And that may be in academics, it may be in vocational, it may be around the area of life skills. But the big thing that changes when students exit the school system is that services are no longer entitled. So even though students may be eligible for some of the adult services that they need to work live, play, or learn additional skills in their community, even though they're eligible, they may be waiting for those services until there's more services available. So a big piece that we really want to accomplish in work experience is learning how each student can be most independent, most self-directed, and pull that vision of them working somewhere in their community together with whatever individualized supports they need in place. And ideally, that last day of high school is going to look like the first day of their adult life, that we pull all of this together before they exit. So in order to graduate into a job, if that's our goal, as we're doing work experience, we really want to make sure that we're maximizing marketable skill development, just not offering people experiences, but looking at intentionally identifying skills that would be real helpful for them in the workplace, skills that employers need, hard skills and soft skills, skills in areas of their interest. The other piece is that in school, students with ongoing support needs typically will have more formal support available to them while they're in school than as they exit school. So if we have a student working alongside a paraprofessional or a teacher while they're in school, what I want to encourage you all to think about is fading that person away from the student or using that paraprofessional as a resource to teach the student to be as self-directed as possible. If we teach the person, the student, that they'll always have an adult with them, we're going to set them up for either failure as they head out to work as an adult, or set them up for the system to assume that they're far more dependent on that formal, expensive adult support than they are. So another piece in work experience we should be shooting for is looking at if this student needs reminders about what's next or about how much to complete before you go to the next thing. How do we figure out a different way other than having a support person with them for them to be independent and competent? And I don't want to encourage you to fade teacher support or job coach support away too quickly. There's a definite role for job coaches in training tasks and training students to be quality performers, but we've got to be very cautious to set them up to be dependent on adults to work. The other piece is supporting the student and the family to really understand the impact of each youth's impact of disability. What does that mean in terms of what they need to get to work in the morning? What does their impact of disability translate into for support needs on the job? What kind of accommodations help them be most productive and perform to their best? And let's work with youth and families to be able to communicate that to employers, to support people, to coworkers. And for folks with ongoing support needs, let's understand those ongoing support needs well enough that we can be really creative in how we meet those needs. Again, like all the students who are exiting, who are eligible for developmental disability services in Montana and other states, may have to wait for some of those services. However, if during school work experiences part of our goal is to really understand the conditions under which each youth is most successful and what they need to be successful and independent, and have an idea of how we can creatively meet some of those ongoing support needs, we're going to set people up to go to work right away rather than having to wait for more formal support needs. The other piece is let's look at all the existing supports available in each young adult's life, not just formal DD services and formal VR services, voc rehab and developmental disabilities, although those are going to be really useful services. We don't want to assume those are the only options for support. What about the grandparents? What about the neighbors? What about coworkers? Let's make sure that we're looking at all potential supports available, especially in the rural, remote areas where there may not be any formal support agencies available. Folks still are going to have ongoing support needs. They're still going to live in rural areas. And so how do we make sure that we're tapping into any potential creative support option rather than saying, wow, they live in a rural area, so there's no services here. So either they have to move or they're not working. That's not a good option. And again, thinking about identifying all these creative existing supports, potential services, and get those all connected to the youth in the job situation before they exit. And employment in your community may look different than it does in a college town. I think we've gotten feedback in the past when we're talking about work experience, you know, and we're mentioning rural areas. People are like, yeah, but you still have a grocery store. Yeah, you still have a stoplight. That's not rural enough. So what I tried to do today was keep going more and more creative and more rural. So I'm going to bring in examples from Montana, examples from coworkers, and I'd love to hear some of your examples as well. You know, in the rural towns, employment looks different for everybody there, not just kids with disabilities. But also, the interesting thing and the unique thing about communities in rural towns is that they're different. You know, even though people may have to travel 20, even 40 miles to get to school, that's just not the student with a disability. That's all the students. What a great opportunity to carpool and network with kids that drive and kids that don't drive. One of the other really neat things about small towns is that everybody knows everybody else. And people who want to live in rural, remote areas, even folks without disabilities, have to be pretty creative about earning a living and pretty self-sustaining. So this is a concept that we need to tap into, and some of these resources we need to tap into for youth with disabilities who need to work as well and want to stay in their hometowns. The rural areas, there's lots of opportunity for networking, and there's probably more community and more membership within that community than there is in larger towns. You know, larger towns may have homes and, Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart, but that doesn't mean that those are the employers who are going to be hiring folks. It's much easier to job develop in a company where you know somebody, even if it's a really, really small company. The other piece that you can do in small towns is use your social capital. And what I'm talking about is think about where your family spends money or where you spend money. That's your social capital. You know, maybe you don't work at the bank, but if your school saves all their money and keeps their money at that bank, you've got social capital with that bank. If your family, raises cattle, you're going to be buying feed. You're going to be buying, equipment for your cows. Where do you spend money? And look at who are you connected to. And this would be a great exercise for all youth in your small rural schools to talk about, okay, who are you connected to in your community? Just as part of transition planning for everybody, who does business with whom? It may not be a formal paid relationship. However, it's a connection. And sometimes when the competitive labor market is hard to get into, whether it be because you're in a rural town or whether it be because you have some challenging ongoing support needs and impact of disability, we know that it's easier to get employed through your connections. So especially in the smaller towns, we've got to look at all of our connections, all of our schools' connections, and all of the youth and their families' connections as well, even in terms of work experience. And what I want to introduce to you is the concept of customized employment. And this is a term that was developed by the Department of Labor, and they were started to recognize that the workforce is beginning to look different, and people who need to work, want to work, are asking for more flexibility within their work environments. What this concept opened up for people with disabilities and people who don't compete well for employment is some strategies that enables us to be really flexible in how we negotiate with employers for a particular job. And so I'm going to explain in a minute how customized is different than competitive employment. But in customized, the big thing is that we start with individually determining the strengths, needs, interests, and ideal conditions of the individual with a disability. So we start with who the person is, and then also look at how do we meet the needs of a specific employer. But this strategy is very different from more traditional competitive employment, because in a traditional labor market, and if we're following labor market job development, we're looking for job openings, we're considering what each employer says they need, and many employers and small businesses are saying, look, we need an employee that can do everything. They've got to wait on customers, they've got to answer phones, they've got to run the cash register. We can't hire somebody who can't do all of those pieces. You know, they're looking at people who are applying and therefore competing for existing job openings. If you're filling out a job application and you're, asking to be considered for that position, you're actually then competing against the demands of that job description as well as any other applicants that also fill out that form. And if you think about students with disabilities, many of our students don't compete well. And so the traditional labor market job development approach isn't going to work well for them anyway. And if we're looking in rural areas, there may not be anybody who says they have a job opening. You know, it just may be a really, really hard place for anybody to compete, even people with master's degrees and loads of skills and no impact of disability. So because of the ruralness of really small towns and because of impact of disability, we need to think about that end goal of employment differently. And thus so, we may be thinking about what we're doing for work experience differently. So in customized job development, our end goal is going to be a position tailored to the individual and to the employer. And instead of applying for an opening, you're going to make an employment proposal. That's going to replace the application for an existing opening. And actually the job seeker is going to initiate the approaching the employer with a proposal. And it's going to reflect the best of who they are and seek out information about the employer's unmet needs and try and negotiate a position that works for both people. Thus, it's going to be a one-of-a-kind position. And again, the reasons for doing this in rural areas is that we've got to look at employment differently in rural areas. And for many students who we're working with who have some significant impact of disability, they don't compete well. So we've got to enter the job market differently as well. When we're following a traditional labor market vocational preparation, we're always asking, is this person ready? Do they have the soft skills an employer needs? Are they able to get up and get out the door on their own in the morning? Are they able to take breaks for the appropriate length of time? Do they have the social skills necessary to be, to participate and be successful in employment? Do they have the skills that our labor market needs? And how do these job seeker skills compare to job descriptions and job openings? That approach may screen out many of the youth that you're working with, even if they've already completed all of their high school career. In Customize, we presume readiness. People may not be competitive, but that doesn't mean that they have nothing to contribute. We assume that people have something to contribute, And if we can match that to an unmet need of an employer, then we can negotiate a job. So instead of asking, are they ready, we want to make sure that as a school staff and as an IEP team, we're looking at, do we understand what about a work environment sets this person up to be successful? Do we understand that this person needs such a concrete vision of where they're correct and when a task is complete to be totally independent? And if they don't have that, they're either going to just stand and wait, maybe up to a half hour for somebody to notice they're waiting, or they're going to be asking a bazillion questions of their boss and annoying them because they don't understand when they're going to be correct or when they're complete, their task is complete. So that's the question we're going to be asking instead. We're also going to be asking, do we know what tasks this person can offer employers in our area and what skills they have that would be attractive to an employer? The other piece, again, is who are their connections, especially in a small area? And then again, like back to that great transition activity for all students, thinking about what do people in your community and your life do for work and income? Again, most people in 2 Montana aren't going to tell you that they're working at the grocery store, Home Depot, and Lowe's because those don't exist in 2 So look at what are types of careers, what are types of jobs, what are types of things people do for income in your small town. Is it that you're participating in ranching, agriculture? Is your area like Lewistown, Montana? Is it a big hunting area where part of the economy is supported by hunters coming in, being led out on trips to go hunting? Think about all the support and services tourists need when they come hunting from out of state. Do they need guidance out in the mountains? Do they need a place to stay? Do they need coolers and somebody to pack up all their meat to fly it home? Do they need taxidermy services? Think about where people spend money in your community, even people from outside the community. Also, what do people do in your community to have an income, to support themselves, to feed their families? And think about those are the potential post-school outcomes for employment for everybody. So in my town, I live in Florence, Montana. We've got one stoplight. We're pretty close to Missoula and we're pretty close to Hamilton, which are two much larger towns than Florence. So many people commute into larger towns to work. However, many people support themselves through self-employment. You know, on my street we have somebody that makes cabinets. We have somebody that's a concrete laborer. We've got a contract trucker. We have an accountant. We have a rancher. We have somebody that breeds and races racehorses. We have somebody who's telecommuting and teaching classes through the internet, a plumber. We've got a really small family-run sawmill. We've got a dog trainer and breeder. So having a position at Burger King, which may be your entry-level position in a bigger community, may not be available in your small town. And so working for wage employment may only be one option for your post-school employment outcome. Maybe somebody's going to be self-employed. And maybe it's not that they're going to have a whole cabinet making business, but could they provide a service within the cabinet maker's business that helps the cabinet maker but also enables this person to have a business within a business and use some of the supports that are there? Could somebody provide a service to people in the town, to other businesses? Could somebody get employment through resource ownership? And what that means is, with resource ownership, you market the person with a resource that they own and control that makes sense to them, but is also valuable to the business owner who's going to hire that person. So think about, a mechanic who's coming with specialized tools. In smaller towns, there's going to be smaller businesses. Most small businesses don't have all the capital they themselves need to be able to run the business to the extent they want to. So if we can somehow envision the student that we're supporting and looking for post-school employment, making a contribution to that business in a way that increases traffic, productivity, billables, then we potentially could look at that as our post-school outcome. So I think when we're looking at what we're going to do for work experience, we've got to look at realistically in your community, where are people going to land for their post-school outcome of employment? Also, for small employers, they may not have the capital or the revenue to hire a paid employee. However, they still have unmet needs. What they may want to consider is contracting with the person for certain labor. And so thinking about, okay, so ways that we're going to get into employers isn't going to be through a front door where somebody's hiring. We're going to help them identify the unmet needs of their workplace. What we may want to do is help employers think about tasks that they'd love to get done but just aren't getting done. Or maybe the tasks aren't getting done up to the employer's quality specifications. That would be an unmet workplace need. Or we might think about a task that it would actually make sense for the highly skilled, highly paid, or business owner to not perform, have that task performed by the young adult, because that way the business owner is freed up to do something that brings in more revenue. Or is there another way that we can use this person, or the employer can use this person's skills and contributions to increase the productivity and therefore billables within that business? Like think about, like, is there a way to increase sales if we have the student doing some of the prep work? Like, I don't know, maybe it's, somebody calls ahead to get their grain order for their beef or their vaccinations all pulled together before they pull up. So is that something that this person could speed up the sale, speed up or improve the customer service by pulling some of that inventory in advance and getting that together for the customer? Or, thinking about express lines, where you can make more sales if you can get more people through the business. Or maybe for a mechanic, or a small engine repair. Like, think about farm equipment. What kind of things could speed up getting tractors in and out of a repair place, or getting four-wheelers in and out of a repair place, or a rental place if it's a place where tourists are renting four-wheelers? Could the student be doing some of the prep work to speed up and minimize the amount of time the mechanics are working on the products? And also look at, how do all youth in your community gain work experience and learn a work ethic? Many youth in rural areas are participating in 4-H. 4-H clubs have a lot of service built into them, service experiences. You're taking care of livestock. You're learning to feed. You're learning to clean the livestock. You're learning to, to calculate how much they're bringing you in the end when you sell the livestock. People, kids are out there moving irrigation pipe, stacking hay, mucking stalls. When I surveyed my coworkers at lunch, most of them grew up in various small towns in Montana. And, Gwen grew Christmas trees and sold Christmas trees. She also, picked cherries and sold cherries. Jillian had to pick wheat out of her family's fields. She's not sure if this was a real job or if her dad just sent her out to do that. But also picking rocks, picking strawberries. There's all sorts of stuff that youth are doing in rural communities that serves the purpose of, one, learning a work ethic, learning to be self-directed, and work experience. And so how do we pull in families and community members to make sure that youth with disabilities have the same access to this work experience as everybody else? And so again, thinking about what's our purpose of work experience. I think one of the critical pieces is making sure that all youth and all communities view students, even with the most significant impact of disabilities, as going to work in the community for a paycheck when they graduate from high school. So how do we make sure that we're promoting that expectation for everybody? Even for somebody who's got a significant impact of physical disability and maybe only has movement with their head or a small movement in their hand, so their task is to press a switch that operates something with an on-off switch, and that's how they participate in work. Still, like if we're offering work experience to all students, we're thinking all means all. Even the kids who typically don't have a lot of community interaction and don't have inclusion in regular ed classes, how are we making sure that everybody has a work experience? And also, how do we make sure that we're giving people a variety of experiences so that they can show us what specific interests they have, or they can identify themselves what interests they have and what their skills are, and also what they don't want to do. The other piece that I've referenced a couple times is making sure that youth and their families, as well as the school staff, have a good handle or insight into what are the conditions or the features of a work environment of supports that enable somebody to be successful. And what are their contributions? We've got to learn all of this through work experience so that we can help people start into a paid job before they exit. And then also another really great opportunity from work experience is making classroom and academic information much more functional to the student so they understand why it's important and how they're going to use it in adult life. So what if we approach work experience assuming that it'll evolve as the student gets older and as they get closer to exit? So what if we assume that the purpose of work experience changes as students get older and as they have more work experience? So what if we start out by just exposing students to work and build the vision that everybody can contribute and therefore work, and people are just identifying their preferences, their interests, and then as we get further along in high school, think about, okay, let's really expand the person's list of tasks that we know that they can do. Let's expand the list of skills that we know this student has. And as we're getting closer to exit and thinking about where this person's going to work after they leave school and thinking about how are we going to meet their support needs, let's make real sure that we have a good handle on what the ideal conditions for success are of that student. And so as we're thinking about, okay, this person, and I have a young man in mind that we're working with right now in Hamilton, and what we know about him is that he can be very independent at work, self-directing, as long as he knows exactly what is expected of him. And he's not somebody, when he's confused, who's going to be able to clarify that to the supervisor. What he'll do is ask a lot of questions, or he'll start to make errors, which he's far more competent than that. But if it's a job where it's really vague about when you're done, maybe it's a cleaning job, and it's really hard to tell when something's clean enough, that he would need a whole lot more support in that position than he would if he knows that he's collating packets for 10 new customers with these 8 forms in them, and he needs to quality check this specific information. That's very clear for him. He'll be very independent there. So before he exits, I really want to make sure I have a handle on all that information so I can screen out all potential work sites so that I'm placing him in a place where he's most likely to be successful. And again, strive to make the last day of high school look as closely as possible to that first day of post-school life. So there's various types of work experiences in paid employment. Now in schools, people use the term volunteering frequently. The way I would like to encourage you to use the term volunteering is by the definition. You volunteer in places like nonprofits or educational institutions where other people without disabilities also volunteer. And so you don't get paid for that time. Job shadowing may be a way for people to gain a picture of what certain industries look like or gain some information about what a task or industry looks like. And you go out and you just shadow somebody on the job for a day or two. It's a time-limited experience, and typically there's not a lot of hands-on work that the student does during job shadowing. Service learning might be, you know, a community project that you do in 4-H, or it may be working on the yearbook in high school. It may be, you know, building food baskets for families in need during Thanksgiving. General or generic work experience may be several different work experiences that students all rotate through just to gain experience. Like sometimes there's in-school work experiences or some community work experiences, but everybody who's getting work experience typically rotates through those. So they're pretty generic. It gives you a lot of opportunity to sample different things, but it's not very individualized. And that's fine if you can benefit from that. A matched work experience would be thinking about matching a particular experience to your interest areas for the purpose of developing skills or accessing a little more information about your skills and contributions and maybe support needs within that area of interest. So it would be more individualized. The ultimate individualized work experience would be a customized work experience. And these 3 work experiences typically are unpaid. The customized work experience would be, we think we have a pretty good handle on who you are and what you need to be successful, but we want to test it out before we develop that paid job. I think, unfortunately, we don't give enough time and reflection in what our purpose is during work experience and what we're learning about each student and also what they're learning about themselves. I think if we think about how much time we have left between where a student is now in school and when they're going to exit, and then think about what we need to know about them based on our post-school outcomes, where we want to see them after they graduate, what skills we need to develop, what self-knowledge and self-direction they need to develop between now and post-school. It'll help us develop timelines and benchmarks for what we want to accomplish through work experience for people. I think we don't have to work harder, we've got to work smarter with some of the activities that we're doing. And so for work experience, I love tapping into nonprofits in the community. And even the smaller communities have some nonprofits available, or maybe there's a way to do some service projects for nonprofits remotely. Maybe the Humane Society is 100 miles away, or the Red Cross is 100 miles away, but there's a way that you can contribute in a project where you learn some work skills, but it's not at the typical location. And with nonprofits, usually they welcome anybody who wants to volunteer. It's not that typical to have youth volunteering in many of these places, so people love it when young adults show up. And it's a wonderful way for youth with little work experience to get experience. I'm thinking about, you know, what services exist within the community. Do the neighbors all get together each spring to brand and vaccinate each other's cattle? Is that just something that happens in your rural community? Do people band together when it's harvest season? Is there a community cause that people are fundraising for? Think about how you could turn that into a work experience for somebody within the community. For the generic unpaid work experiences, it may be done in school or it may be done in the community. There's always, jobs in keeping up the grounds of a school building. In the kitchen, if you guys have a cafeteria or kitchen. In the office, there's always clerical things that students can try out. You may create a service, and so actually create a self-employment experience. And it's a service that's offered to teachers and or students. Or maybe you develop some sites in the community. A small school in Florence has developed several different services within their school for unpaid in-school experience. They had the special ed class take over the lost and found cabinet, and there's various jobs within just having a lost and found cabinet that the students do. Like some of them enter data about what the items are, and they keep it on a website and they update it. And so there's some quality control, there's some data entry. They post signs when there's parent-teachers meetings about what items might be in the lost and found cabinet. They try and reconnect them with people. Somebody else organizes it, somebody else cleans it. But think about what's available and get creative, but then also think about what are all the tasks that you can teach and what are all the skills that you can assess during that work experience. If you're doing unpaid work experience in the community, in businesses that are for-profit, like where people don't volunteer, you have to follow Department of Labor regulations. And they go beyond just these hour requirements. And on the next page, this is the most wonderful resource that I've ever found on work-based learning for unpaid work experience. And it can be accessed on our website, shared, downloaded, but it's a wonderful resource for anybody who's doing unpaid work experience in the community. Also think, when we're looking at pulling together an IEP team for a student with disabilities, that team goes beyond school staff. So would it be okay for us to assume that maybe all work experience doesn't happen during the school day? Maybe somebody is helping out their neighbor, and this is a wonderful work experience activity, but it's pretty informal. It's not overseen by the school or initiated by the school, but what a great source of information about the student's support needs, their contributions, their skills and tasks. And we just kind of happened upon this as we were getting to know this one student and putting together information about who he was to introduce him to his high school staff when he transitioned from middle school to high school. But his mom went over to interview the neighbor about what he did while he was hanging out over there. And the neighbor told her all these skills and abilities that Anders had that Mom wasn't aware of because she doesn't work on trucks when Anders is at home. And so he's learned all this stuff from the neighbor. But maybe that's another way that we can look at how to offer quality and diverse work experience for students in really rural areas. Self-employment, either during the school day, during the summer, or after school, is also going to be a great work experience. And many of us had self-employment experiences, either babysitting, selling lemonade on the corner, selling cherries and strawberries, pet sitting. All of that is pretty informal self-employment. Again, in rural areas, this may be what students are doing for work experience. Maybe they're raising chickens and selling the eggs. Or maybe they're getting rid of the birds. Think about, I just recently have met somebody who supported herself by ridding people's barns and buildings of unwanted birds as her paid job when she was between competitive labor market jobs. She said she raised more money doing this than working for a sporting goods store. But think about, this is going to be a need in communities that are more rural, what beyond some of these ideas are also going to be needs and therefore avenues for employment and or work experience. This is a picture of a young man who we were looking for a work experience for him within a larger company where he could make deliveries along an established route, that it would be pretty stable footing for him because his vision and balance on some days was worse than other days. Also, he was fabulous with communicating with familiar people, but pretty shy with people he didn't know. And also his communication was limited to hi, bye, and a big smile, pat on the back. And that really made his day and made the day of people that he interacted with. So we created a delivery business for him that enabled him to be at his best and do the tasks that he liked to do and could do, but also met an unmet need of a company in a town. So maybe in your town you don't have a huge business. However, maybe there's, a place where people need something brought in, and your person can be the go-between and the delivery person and develop that service into an entrepreneurial venture. So again, we've got to think about what the end goal of employment looks like differently, and therefore what the work experience also is going to look, how they're going to look differently as well. This is a young man who graduated from Lewistown High School probably close to 7 years ago now, and he really, really wanted to have a shredding business. My concern is that far too many people with disabilities end up sentenced to careers in shredding. We don't want to promote that just because we aren't creative enough to think of other options for people, that everybody with a disability needs to shred. But in Mike's case, I could not suggest anything else that he wanted to do. So we supported him in putting together a shredding business, and he marketed it with his family when he exited from school. He would go out and he would market the service to various businesses, to realtors, to medical clinics, to the special ed cooperative and the courthouse. And basically he would take his shredder around town and sit in one office for maybe a week and shred, and then get rid of all the shredding material. He would find people that did shipping, like taxidermists. There was a local artist who shipped sculptures, or the Humane Society, or he would sell it by the pound to the recycling place. But that was his post-school outcome that met his need and his desire for what he wanted employment to look like. He didn't want to be taxed every day. He wanted it to be a really easy job. He wanted to go to different places so that he could chat with different people, and he wanted to spend a lot of time hanging out in town and playing pool in addition to working. So why don't we pause for questions right now, and then I want to show you the Employment First Georgia site, which has some great ideas of rural employment.
And just a reminder, if you have questions, please type them into your chat box. I know there is a hand-raising feature on GoToWebinar, but it often doesn't work and we're not able to unmute people. So if you could type your question in, that would be really helpful. Questions from anyone?
Okay, Kim, I have a question.
Okay.
It's Ellen. Oh, never mind. I answered my own question.
That was easy.
Okay. Okay, so we're going back to show my screen. This is a really cool website that I was introduced to by a coworker. And for those of you who haven't seen the customized employment videos that have just been released by Department of Labor, there's solutions for youth with disabilities, solutions for employers, and creating opportunities and solutions through customized employment. They're all short videos that you can share with families, with youth, with employers. Okay, I'm looking for Barry, the fish processing. These videos were captured from the Georgia Customized Employment Project by a project at University of Georgia. And they're just very nicely done. And it gives you an idea of, okay, in a really rural area, how are you going to match somebody's skills and abilities to what's available for employment in that real rural area? You may have to be real creative.
Could you tell us what he's saying? We can't hear it, Ellen.
Oh, no. Okay, basically what he's saying is that somebody had approached him as the job developer and was representing Barry and said, we have somebody with a disability who needs employment. And he said, I don't really think I have anything right now. But during the discussion, what they found was that, nobody offered this catfish processing at the Christian Catfish Hole. And so what they did was they ended up reintroducing this service because Barry liked fish. They bought him this skinning machine, and this was something that really matched what Barry's interests were, what his skills were. And then as you can see, this isn't his job coach putting his gloves on. This is his coworker. And so what they talk about is that they just provide these natural supports to him just as a coworker. He's providing this service to customers. He's got a business that he runs himself within their business, and now they're pulling in more fishermen because there's this service available.
And we do have some questions that have come in. Would you like me to read those to you or not yet?
Hold on, I got to get rid of this Barry the Catfish song.
Okay.
I can't hear anything else. There, okay. I'm so sorry that you guys couldn't hear that music. It's very fun, but it was very distracting for me. Okay, let me pull up the PowerPoint again. Okay, so you should be seeing the PowerPoint now. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So the first question that came in is, what is the best way for a school to create an employer base within the community from scratch?
I would start with who knows that community really well, who's well connected. Ideally, it's going to be somebody who's lived there for a while and just seems to know everybody there. And then if you have no work experience sites currently, start with who your students are and what's going to make the most sense. The easiest ones are the nonprofits. I would tackle them first. The school work experience sites should be pretty easy to identify. You're going to need to negotiate that with your administration. But then, start one employer at a time. In Florence, we started identifying community employers when we had a student that really needed a community work experience, and there was nothing that she could actually participate in at the grocery store, which is where most of the other students went. So we went to the bank, we went to the realtors, we went to the pharmacy, and we ended up at the physical therapy / local gym. And so after we had done the spiel to each of the 4 sites, then we had work experience sites for other students because people in the community, wanted to work with their kids and their neighbors' kids.
Okay. And this one says, I have a question about school-based work experience, especially when no other students are doing jobs like cleaning up the grounds and the cafeteria. I worry that it can hurt the student's reputation with the rest of the student body.
I think that's a very valid argument, and I'm not sure that we talked about cleaning up the grounds or cleaning the cafeteria, but I think that's kind of a logical conclusion for you to make because that's where we typically go, unfortunately, with youth with disabilities and adults with disabilities. What about learning to plant flowers and take care of the flowers and the trees on the grounds, learning landscaping skills, or learning prep cook and organizing and inventory control in the cafeteria? Like that might be a really neat work experience that other students are jealous of versus students thinking that people with disabilities just clean.
Okay. Is there any benefit for the employer to hire people with disabilities through SSI or other government agencies that could be a selling point for the employers worried about the tough economical times we are facing?
There are work opportunity tax credits, and it typically benefits larger employers than smaller employers. It's similar to the veterans tax credits that are just being proposed right now through the administration. But I think if we've got to be cautious and make sure that we're offering something more than just a tax credit. I know right now it's tough for people to hire, but if we can think about how the person we're representing can contribute and help benefit the business, then and meet the employer's unmet needs, that's going to be a stronger sale than getting money back on your taxes. And given that, employers may still not be able to hire. However, they might be very willing to contract with somebody to get their need met, and which is a very valid form of employment.
Okay. In the video clip that you showed, do you know if vocational rehabilitation bought the fish skinner machine or if the employer bought it or who paid for that?
I actually don't know because this was just a video I saw when I was doing training with a coworker. But actually, Voc Rehab could potentially buy the fish skinner. Barry may have gotten a loan from somebody to buy the fish skinner. The business may have bought it and then developed this business, and because they may have benefited from it as well. He may have used a Social Security work incentive called a PASS plan to buy it. So lots of different creative ways. My guess is that it's not that expensive a piece of equipment either.
Okay. And this last one I think is just a comment in response to the question about how to establish a base in the community, a base of employers, and it says meet with the local Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, unless you don't have one in your little community. Maybe it's where all the ranchers go for breakfast in the morning. And that's a better place to learn who your employers are in the community. But especially in your small communities, invite families to help you solve this problem. This can't be totally on the shoulders of a special ed teacher.
Okay. And then one more came in, and then we'll return to your presentation. Should discovery be done while the student is in high school? Should it be part of his or her IEP?
I would say most definitely, And, you know, under IDEA legislation, schools are being asked to do age-appropriate transition assessments. And I think being purposeful and learning from work assessment and, you know, learning from our experiences with students is a perfect form of age-appropriate transition assessment, especially for people who we're not going to be able to learn much from by doing interest inventories or rating scales, or in a rural community where, basically, so you take this interest inventory and come up with the fact that you would love to be an insurance salesman and wear business suits every day. You know, maybe that doesn't even exist in your community. You're going to have to be more creative anyway. So let's look at who you are, what you do, and who you know, and start there for employment.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. That's it for now.
Okay. On our website, which you guys have the address to in a couple different places, is a great resource called Developing a Guide to Your Work Experience Program. And within that guide are examples of, you know, an assessment plan and a job site analysis for a work experience site that helps you look at, okay, for each site that you go into, what are all the different things I could learn about a student from having them do a work experience here? What are all the different things I could teach them while they're here for tasks, social skills, soft skills, all sorts of stuff? And then what is my plan to teach this student during this work experience? You know, for one young man that I've worked with since he was in 7th grade, our first work experience really was to assess, you know, what his academic skills were. Could he work independently without somebody constantly telling him what was next? And also developing a comfort level in interacting with people who are unfamiliar. And we just learned a ton about him just from the first meeting with the employer, where he looked like he was not attending to her in the least. But when we got back to the classroom, he was able to tell us what the work rules were, write them down so that he remembered them, and so did we. We also learned that he could stop mid-task when he found an error. Say there was a book that started with K and he was up in the B books. He would take that book that was supposed to go into K, walk down to the K section, place it there, and resume working exactly where he had left off. We also found that once he knew what the expectations were and how to do it correctly, he worked nonstop, very focused. Even if you were in the room, he just ignored you and kept working. That was very different information that we thought we knew about him from school. And so again, think about varying your work experiences based on purpose and how close you are to graduation. You know, so in Hamilton, what we did with this work experience program was identified all the nonprofits in town. So there was the Garden, there was the Humane Society, and then from each of those generic experiences, like they weren't really matched to students' interests or skills, but from each one, what we wanted to do was start listing out what we knew about the student in terms of skills and abilities, but also in terms of support needs. And so for Tyler, he's a young man who just graduated from high school this past year, but he's been doing work experience since 7th grade. So, you know, as somebody who's in his life, I have a great handle on what his conditions are to be successful, what his skills are, what tasks he can do. But the only way that I got a handle on that was figuring out, okay, what did we learn about him after each work experience? What kind of things do we need him to expand on for skills? And if you have the luxury of having those 5 years for different work experiences, we can really stretch that student, but also have them leave with such an amazing resume and portfolio of what they've done and what their skills are. You know, this was a young man in Kalispell who his first work experience was working at the food bank. And his mom chose that because she had a connection to the local food bank. But then in school, she wanted him to have some academic experiences. She wanted to make sure that he wasn't just having work experience cleaning. She's like, you know, he does enough of that at home. He knows how to do that. So in the school library, he shelved books, and he also developed newspapers throughout the school. And so again, we looked at what are all the skills that we've learned about him, so that when we go to market him in a paid job in the community, we have this all together. Because again, if he's not going to compete for a job, I want to make sure that I can communicate all this to an employer as I'm making a proposal about what Alex could bring to them and to their business. And so again, I know I'm going through these pretty quickly, but what I've realized is that we could have done part 1 and part 2 rural work experience. But you guys can download all this information in PDF form so that you can reference it after this. You know, we also learned about the conditions under which Alex was successful, and also some areas that we could work on through his IEP to make him more successful. You know, he does best when he knows what's coming, and for him, going to the food bank was kind of traumatic at first because the job changed every day, and it depended on what had been donated that day and what needed to be repackaged, and that just made him a bit anxious. And so at the same time, the family and the support staff really wanted him to learn to use the phone. So they had him call the food bank and basically learn the strategy of calling ahead and saying, what's my job for today? And so he accomplished 2 things. He learned to use the phone, got more comfortable with it, and also prepared himself for what was going to happen at work. You know, as they were doing different experiences, they found that he learned skills and tasks really quickly. And he has a knack for, if there is a rule, written or just known, he follows it just exactly. However, what was problematic for him was when other people don't follow the rules. And so teaching him how to deal with that and some coping mechanisms, because, you know, we can only screen out so many work environments where everybody follows the rules and everybody follows the rules all the time. You know, there's definitely certain environments where that's more likely, and that's going to be easier for him. But what about when there's a substitute there? What about when the teachers in the school library aren't whispering and they're talking too loud? You know, it's probably not okay to go up and shush them. So great learning opportunities for him and for the staff about what works, what doesn't work. So as he got older, his family said, you know, he's been giving us some indication that he's really interested in clerical tasks. Also, he kept mentioning that he wanted to work with little children. And we were a little concerned about what if there's a screaming little children, and this is a young man who doesn't like high, squeaky, loud noises that are unpredicted. You know, how's that going to go for him? And also, could he take his academic and organizing expertise from the school library to the public library? So the team coordinated 3 of these work experiences in the summer, matching them to his interest areas to identify additional skills and additional tasks for the future within these areas of interest. And then as he went into high school, what they wanted to do was keep going with that. Like, he's got an interest in an aptitude in numbers and math, editing and proofreading, cooking and food prep. And even though this school had some established generic work experiences or inexperienced sites, which kind of were, you know, there wasn't much to learn about Alex in those sites, what Mom was able to do is say, look, he knows how to cook, but he doesn't know how to do the inventory for your kitchen. Could that be something that he works on? He knows how to use the computer, but could he help you with some editing and proofreading? Another work experience was washing towels for a local hairdresser. And she said, you know, that's washing towels. He already knows how to use the washer and dryer at home. We don't fold, we just hang them right back up, so that's not very functional for him. However, could we have him do an experience with numbers and math on the computer whereby he is invoicing the hairdresser? So just coming at work experience sites that may be just generic with a more individualized twist for each student, we can really maximize what they benefit in terms of learning new skills and what the team benefits from learning about the student. You know, and this is Tyler, like you first met him when he was in 7th grade. This is when he was in high school, and he was collating packets for us, and we learned a ton of information about him quality checking his own work that I hadn't known that he would do on his own. He got to the end of these packets and realized that he had extras of the green fact sheet. So on his own, he went back through every single packet to look to see if he had missed putting a green fact sheet in one of them. And so think about sharing that skill and that initiative with employers now that we're doing job development for him, now that he's exited school. You know, and another thing, you know, back to his initial goal of interacting with people he's unfamiliar with, somebody decided if they taught him how to use the cash register, he'd have to interact with the customers. So learned a lot about his math aptitude, and also gave him kind of a script in a way to interact with people that he may not be familiar with. Another young man in a small town in Montana, we learned from his family that he was really interested in kids and had a lot of good skills and attributes there. And so his paraprofessional developed a work experience within the preschool. And we found that one of his major skills and contributions was that if there was a screeching, upset child, he happily took on that child, sat down with them, locked them if need be, and just stayed quiet and gave them one-to-one attention. Like, can you imagine selling that contribution and task in a primary school? And so again, thinking about what's the purpose of the work experience and thinking about the end in mind. Ian was a young man, he's a senior this year, and he lives in a larger community, but he had never been at work without a paraprofessional with him. And part of what we wanted to look at was, what does he need in terms of predictable environment to move from one task to the next on his own accurately, and if he stopped to participate in some, you know, stereotypical behaviors, how long does that happen, and does he really need somebody with him all the time to work? And what we found is that if we just add some of his social rules to his checklist about you shake hands once and then you move on, or it's time to work, you know, if you need to jump around and make sounds, you're going to do that on break. And then a list of his tasks, he's so motivated by checking off what he's done and moving to the next thing that once he learned the job, with the help from the job coach, he was there on his own. And so again, what we wanted to make sure happened is that everything we learned about Ian was captured. What are his skills? What are his contributions? And maybe we don't understand what this means in terms of a future career right now, but this is your age-appropriate transition assessment. This is a perfect use of work experience and also meeting that requirement. You know, we talked about a customized work experience, and this is somebody who's actually an adult, but through discovery I felt like I had a pretty good handle on who he was, but I wasn't quite sure. I needed to test it out. And so we negotiated with an employer where he could do work that had a very concrete start and finish. It was very measurable how much you had to do before you were done. It was physically demanding. There was room to move around because it was outside, and it was an environment that wasn't very breakable. And so I custom tailored the work experience, and because he was an adult, Voc Rehab did pay his wages during this time. But it was basically initially it was just to test out all the theories that I had about what he needed to be successful. And luckily he proved us right. So he ended up getting hired there. But think about, you know, what is the age of the student? And I would say let's start work experiences at middle school or even before. Let's start talking to families about what students are doing for chores at home. What are their responsibilities? Work experience shouldn't be all on the shoulders of the school. This is a whole community family exercise. So I'm going to skip ahead just to get to a couple other points because we're running out of time. But, assume that everybody in your class can make a contribution. Even if this person doesn't verbally say that they want to work, even if they have no experience with money because they just don't participate with money at all, start with the assumption that everybody can contribute and your community wants to get to know all potential youth in your school. And then it's up to us to figure out how the person's going to participate. And maybe it's as small as hitting a switch with the side of their face to run an electric stapler to staple membership applications for the local health club. But still, that's a work experience, and for somebody with that level of impact of disability, we're going to have to start out very customized and very individualized for them to participate at all. The other thing is to think about how are we documenting what we learn about students' performance through work experiences. A lot of the schools are using some Likert scales to measure readiness. If I'm the job developer that doesn't give me enough information about what the contributions are, what the uniquenesses are of this student in terms of abilities, in terms of interests, and also in terms of support needs, I need a little more narrative descriptive information. And so within within our website, there's several different examples of ways that you can capture information. But I think even taking a flip cam video of somebody doing a work experience after they've learned it gives me a ton of information if I'm collecting vocational information for the purpose of job development. Observation notes that are factual, descriptive, narrative helps a ton. Even if you don't draw a conclusion, that's actually better. And then at the end of each work experience, even an in-school work experience, I would recommend that you write up a work assessment summary. Again, these can meet the requirements of the age-appropriate transition assessment for part of it, and also your functional vocational evaluation. This basically is looking at how somebody functions in a real work experience. And it gives you a lot of information about the student and where you're going for transition. So if you think about observation notes, think about writing just the facts. And there's some examples in a minute in here. And as you're talking about just the facts, this is a great skill if you're supervising job coaches as a teacher, teaching them to write descriptively, especially if you don't always get to see the students out at their work experience site. Get them to write descriptively so it's not about them and there's no judgment from the writer involved. It's just about the facts. What did they see? Does it indicate whether or not the student was motivated or not motivated? Do they describe the supports that the student used or what was offered? It's also going to give you, as the teacher or the supervisor, some great information about whether or not your job coaches need some help with organizing a task, teaching the task, and then fading. Sometimes from the descriptive notes you can see that the person has no idea that they're supposed to be fading back their support. This is great information to have while the student's in school to base the next work experience on, but also to share with adult agencies if you're lucky enough to have them in your area and there's availability there. But again, this is an example of writing just the facts. We don't want to have my judgment here. Basically I have numerical information. You can see how many different fact sheets he collated, 30 folders in 20 minutes. Upon completion, he flipped back through each of the 30 packets looking for any packet that did not have one copy of each of the fact sheets. From this description, then you can pull out skills and abilities and support needs. That's how we're going to get that information from the work experiences. And then the other really important piece for kids with a more significant impact of disability is in identifying the ongoing support needs for after high school, We can, if we're really concrete about what somebody needs, like maybe they need door-to-door transportation, maybe they need a job that's structured and so predictable it never changes. There's a list of 5 items that they move through in 1 hour, and that's the extent of what they can do. But knowing that gives you the power and the ability to either negotiate that or just create a checklist so that the person's not dependent on a job coach with them all the time. And so ideally, as each person exits, we have a vision of, and we can list it out in this chart, is that the conditions under which they'll be successful, interest or vocational themes, places they're leading you to look for employment, what the person's contributions are, what their tasks are, and then a list of employers that would most likely have need of their tasks and would match them well enough so the person is successful. So again, think about the end goal of work experience guiding what you do for experience and what you learn from the experience. But ideally, we're looking at placing people into a well-matched job with whatever support they need in place before they exit high school. So I'm just going to end there. Do we have any questions?
If you have any, please feel free to type them into your chat box. We do have a couple of minutes available. Just a reminder, while we're waiting for questions to come in, the PDF version of today's PowerPoint is available on our website, and you should be able to see that address in your chat box.
And if you haven't been to our website before, please go visit. All of our previous webinars are archived. You can, visit them when you have the availability or share them with families and youth. There's many webinars on there created by youth for youth. There's also tons of articles and products, a lot around customized employment, a lot around work experience. There's an example of an age-appropriate transition assessment that's more narrative and descriptive based on interviews and observations, which I find to be much more appropriate for some students than the checklists or interest inventories.
And just a couple of closing remarks while we wait for people to type in their questions, because I know that takes a few minutes. A reminder that we will be sending out a link to a really short online survey about today's webinar, and we ask that you please take the time to fill that out. We do read through all of the comments, and we take them into account as we prepare our upcoming sessions. So please take the time to fill that out when you receive the link. And also, we will be sending listserv, Montana Transition Listserv members, our calendar for the upcoming 12-month period. We're in the process of developing that webinar calendar right now, and as soon as it's ready, we will get that sent out to everyone. So be watching for that in the next 3 to 4 weeks. We will have the recording from today's webinar posted to both the Transition Projects and the Rural Institute Pluck online toolbox websites, and those should be showing up in your chat window as well. It's an integrated recording, so you'll both be able to see the slides and hear the audio. And okay, and somebody has written in that you're not seeing the link in your chat box, so I can read the address to you. For the PDF version, it's http://www.ruralinstitute, that's all one word, .umt, M as in Montana, .edu/transition/handouts, and that's with a capital H, /work, underline, experiences, underline, rural.pdf. And you can also get there just by going to the Rural Institute Transition Project's website and clicking on training. There's a training button on the left-hand side of the page, and as you scroll down that page, you'll see today's webinar and the PDF version of the PowerPoint. And that's also where the recording will be posted once it's ready, and that usually takes about 2 weeks to get posted, the recording portion of it. Other questions from anybody? Don't see any.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for participating today.
And thank you, Ellen, for your fabulous presentation, and we look forward to hearing comments from those of you who attended. Have a great day.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.